Welcome to Context. I'm Brad Harris. Some have been asking where I've been over the past year or so, why I haven't continued to release new content. The answer is such a cliche. I've been busy, but pretty exceptionally busy for me. Raising a new child, for one, starting a new job, moving across the country. But just like you, I've been here all the while, observing how our liberal democracy continues to get battered by bad ideas. And yet, when the cacophony of the news gets to be too much, I continue to take refuge in books. Real books. The ones that have a weight in your hands, that have the smell of paper and old wood and dust, that can't be censored in real time. Real books are what I run to when I need an oasis of perspective. The latest is All Quiet on the Western Front. And it got me thinking in ways I'd like to share with you once again. So, here we are. All Quiet on the Western Front is a novel, more like a memoir, that was written by Erich Maria Remarque, a German veteran of World War I, and originally published in 1929. It offers an unflinching examination of the physical and psychological horrors endured by soldiers during the First World War. The narrative follows the experiences of a young German soldier, Paul Baumer, and his friends, who, influenced by nationalistic school teachers and intense social pressure, enlist in the German army, only to be confronted with the brutality of trench warfare. This book has come to mind recently because of how its themes parallel so much of what's going wrong in modern society. My conviction only grows stronger. The ruling classes, irrespective of the society they inhabit, are invariably inclined toward corruption and calculated deceit in their unrelenting pursuit of power. Leafing through the pages of history, one discerns a recurring pattern wherein these privileged few perpetually disseminate falsehoods, cunningly orchestrating the preservation of their influence as they siphon wealth from the citizenry. And as much as they may take meticulous care not to precipitate the catastrophic collapse of the very system that bolsters their advantage, it teeters dangerously now and again. It's teetering now. All Quiet on the Western Front serves as a harrowing case study of the devastating consequences of deceit perpetuated by the ruling class. Through the candid portrayal of the young German soldier's experiences in World War I, Erich Maria Remarque illuminates the stark contrast between the glorified rhetoric of patriotism and heroism peddled by the elite and the gruesome realities of trench warfare. The novel exposes the lies and manipulations that propel these men into the brutal and unforgiving conflict, ultimately shattering their dreams, innocence, and lives. They were promised adventure, but in the author's own preface, they got something quite different. Quote, "This book is to be neither an accusation nor a confession, and least of all an adventure. For death is not an adventure to those who stand face to face with it. It will simply try to tell of a generation of men who, even though they may have escaped shells, were destroyed by the war." End quote. The book centers on a group of teenage boys, former classmates and friends, pressured into the German army to fight on the front lines. Early in the book, the main character, Paul Baumer, reflects on his schoolmasters' and even his parents' admonitions to join the fight. Quote, "I can see him now, as he used to glare at us through his spectacles and say in a moving voice, 'Won't you join up, comrades?' No one could very well resist, because at that time even one's parents were ready with the word coward. No one had the vaguest idea what we were in for. The wisest were just the poor and simple people. They knew the war to be a misfortune, whereas those who were better off and should have been able to see more clearly what the consequences would be were beside themselves with joy. The idea of authority, which they represented, was associated in our minds with a greater insight and more human wisdom. But the first death we saw shattered this belief." End quote. Could it be any more self-evident that even in this modern age, those who parade their erudition are often the ones most devoid of simple wisdom? They stand not just as passive receptacles of state-sponsored discourse, but as self-appointed heralds, thrusting their sanctioned narratives upon us with a grim self-satisfaction, all while wielding their otherwise vacuous credentials like scepters. But then, has the historical script ever deviated significantly? Isn't the quintessential lesson of history, if one dares to look, a treatise on the necessity of skepticism toward those who claim authority? The primary reason most remain oblivious, allowing themselves to be seduced by the siren song of their would-be rulers, is nothing more than a profound ignorance of the past. The issue is as stark as it is heartbreaking. The toll of unquestioning fealty to those in power has, time and again, exacted a devastating price on humanity, in body, mind, and spirit. Consider the young Germans thrust onto the blood-soaked front lines of the Great War, a living testament to this bitter truth. Their experience was a waking nightmare, a cruel stripping away of illusions, a brutal initiation into the realities of life under the shadow of authority. It was, in essence, a trinity of devastation, spiritual, psychological, and physical, rolled into one shell-shocked existence that yanked the wool from their eyes with a violence that was all too real. As the author writes, quote, "The first bombardment showed us our mistake, and under it the world as they had taught it to us broke into pieces." End quote. As the author astutely observes, the fabrications spun by those wielding authority find their most fertile ground among the unseasoned minds of the young, bereft of the hard-won wisdom bestowed by life's trials and tribulations, which the seasoned pedagogues of propaganda, be they professors or state functionaries, themselves should possess in abundance. These boys, dispatched to the trenches, stand defenseless against the onslaught of manufactured narratives. They imbibe the deceitful brew not just willingly, but avidly, their hearts throbbing with a nigh palpable thirst for purpose, for a marked place in the annals of history. Narrative is what all humanity craves, and especially narrative that places oneself in the center of some great drama. For ages, religion fed this appetite. And as it has waned in our increasingly secular era, philosophers like Nietzsche imagined presciently what horrors might fill the void. Not even horses escaped the consequences of the lies that led these boys so naively into the trenches. After one particularly brutal bombardment of French artillery, the German youth are confused for a moment to hear a somewhat more haunting cry amid the screams of soldiers. As the author writes, quote, "It was the sound of wounded horses, and it was unendurable. It was the moaning of the world. It was the martyred creation, wild with anguish, filled with terror, and groaning. 'For God's sake, shoot them!' someone cried." End quote. In the wake of such an experience, it dawns on the boys that there is no going back. Not really. They're shell-shocked through and through. They spent years in a nightmare that everyone they thought knew better sent them into. The circuits of their minds are blown. About a third of the way through the book, they ponder the mystery of peacetime. Quote, "How will we ever get used to normal life after this? 2 years of shells and bombs. A man won't peel that off as easily as a sock. It's the same for everyone, not only for us here, but everywhere, for everyone who is of our age. It is the common fate of our generation. The war has ruined us for everything. We were 18 and had begun to love life and the world, and we were sent to shoot it to pieces. We are cut off now from striving, from progress. We believe in such things no longer. Now, we only believe in the war." End quote. In my opinion, this is one of the most heartbreaking quotes of the book because it rings so true to the present moment. Millions of young Americans are in the process of being brainwashed right now to abandon hope and dignity and faith in liberal democracy so that they may fight a new kind of trench warfare of the spirit that seeks to blow up common sense and civil order for the sake of misinformed notions of punitive justice and an unbridled narcissism masquerading as compassion. Young Americans who, like Paul Baumer and his comrades in the trenches a little over a century ago, had also begun to love life and the world, blossoming with the all-too-common young adult passion to fight for something bigger than themselves, something good, something true, something beautiful. The heartbreak comes in watching how that passion is systematically turned against what is actually good, what is actually true, what is actually beautiful. They seek to destroy institutions they do not understand. They seek war against demons that do not exist. They seek a future that has proven countless times in the past to lead only to despair. And because they don't know history, they will learn the hard way that the authorities they looked up to sent them to shoot the world to pieces too. And if they're still thoughtful enough in the aftermath, they may look in the mirror one day and see the monster they thought they were fighting staring back at them. The effects aren't as dehumanizing today as they were for Paul Baumer and his friends in the Great War, though the principle is the same. Remarque describes it well, quote, "We have lost all feeling for one another. We can hardly control ourselves when our glance lights on the form of some other man. We are insensible, dead men, who through some trick, some dreadful magic, are still able to run and to kill." End quote. Of course, in the throes of today's manufactured rage, how could anyone recognize the dignity of their perceived enemies? Not even a moment of true open-mindedness, let alone reasonable skepticism, passes before judgment is made, and that based purely on the caricatures crafted by the propagandists. This is not the behavior of an intelligent, confident, just society. This is the behavior of a society at war with itself. Meanwhile, our real enemies are looking on, laughing. And maybe some of this is actually being provoked by them in the first place, and we're just fools. There is apparently a lot of evidence that Russia and China have spent considerable resources poisoning our national discourse through Facebook, TikTok, and other social media. They are trying to destroy us from within because we're too powerful to take on head-to-head. It's well documented that Chinese-owned TikTok offers a radically different user experience in the United States compared with the user experience in China. In the United States, TikTok algorithms are geared to be as addictive and divisive as possible. They push intellectual trash, fast food of the mind, as hard as possible to make our kids as dumb and depressed and addicted to TikTok as possible. Meanwhile, China carefully curates TikTok content in China, where they limit the amount of time kids can use the application to no more than 40 minutes per day, and the content available is mostly educational or nationalistic in order to make their kids as smart, patriotic, and healthy as possible. As former Google developer and social media ethics expert Tristan Harris said in a recent interview, quote, "The Chinese recognize that technology is influencing kids' development, and so they make their domestic version a spinach version of TikTok while they ship the opium version to the rest of the world. If you're under 14 years old in China, TikTok shows you science experiments you can do at home, museum exhibits, patriotism videos, and educational videos, adding that children in China were limited to only 40 minutes a day on the app. There's a survey of preteens in the US and China asking, what is the most aspirational career that you want to have? And in the US, the number one was social media influencer, while in China, the number one was astronaut. You allow these two societies to play out for a few generations, and I can tell you what your world is going to look like." End quote. The disintegration we are witnessing from within, this pull into the trenches of a grotesque new struggle for the integrity of our nation, it's no clandestine affair. We're all painfully aware. However, an overwhelming sense of impotence pervades many of us, as if we stand helpless against the surging tide intent on submerging our collective common sense, our culture, our institutions. This, too, holds echoes of an all too familiar historical malady. Many other societies through the ages have been eerily conscious of their way of life unfurling, unraveling before them, ensnared in a kind of paralysis in the face of their impending fate. In All Quiet on the Western Front, the German soldiers put it this way, quote, "I think it's more a kind of fever. No one in particular wants it, and then all at once there it is. We didn't want the war, the others say the same thing, and yet half the world is in it all the same. End quote. World War I was an abomination, a cycle of destruction that dwarfed any arguable benefits. Young men, propelled into the maelstrom, were subjected to tortures that defy comprehension, while those who held the reins of power, the ones who deployed them into this chaos, reaped negligible, if any, rewards. In a twist of irony, before the echoes of the so-called Great War had even receded, a fresh new surge of conflict engulfed the world. The new generation of German youth, coming of age amidst the specter of maimed veterans, seemed blind to the lessons etched in their scars and amputated limbs, too deafened by the clarion call of their own era's propagandists, too entranced by the throbbing pulse of their moment to heed the lessons of all the moments that came before them. And thus, history reprised its grim performance. The Great War was rechristened World War I, and another set of young men were fed into the same monstrous machinery of violence and despair. This cycle persists, each new generation poisoned in mind and spirit by bad influences into dismissing hard-earned wisdom and arrogantly asserting their supposed moral superiority. And now, once again, the older generation of professors and administrators and politicians and parents and CEOs is complicit, feeding the fervently unenlightened demands of youth in hopes of satisfying their own appetites for power and influence. This is the perpetual tragedy scripted by our history, and we are trapped, we are helpless, unless we decide not to be. There is nothing profound about how we get out of the mess we once again are making of modern society. History is simply reaffirming that when we allow people who have no historical perspective or common sense to run the show, most things break. People have dreamed of benign dictators or robot overlords for so long because ruling ourselves is hard, and the idea of handing the reins to someone else is alluring. When America itself was young, most foreign onlookers scoffed at our quixotic experiment in multi-ethnic liberal democracy, assuming that we would tear ourselves apart before long. We're still here, but we won't be much longer if too many more of our kids are led into the ideological trenches. What we need most right now is for the old guard to take up their weapons of reason, common sense, and experience and hold the line of meritocracy, objectivity, and self-reliance. And we desperately need one other thing: hope. We need to restore our culture of optimism. We need our kids to wean themselves off of the moral panic that the world is coming to an end in a few years, that words make them unsafe, that there's a boogeyman out to get them at every turn from whom they need protection. We need our kids to grow up, and we need to show them what that means. I'm Brad Harris. So long.